Matthew's Gospel, chapter 6, towards the end of that chapter from verse 25, I think, but thank you, Helen.
Morning, everybody, and morning to our friends on Zoom. So I'm reading from Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 to 34. And the passage is entitled Do Not Worry, which I find is easy to say, but quite hard to do. But hopefully these verses help. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you by worrying add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labour or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendour was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Amen.
Thank you, Helen, very much. Some of you will know that about 10 years ago, I retired from being a Baptist minister. And one of the first things that Judy and I did was to join a local golf club. Now, the interesting thing about that was that up to that time, for about nearly the last 40 years, up to that time, I guess I had spent 90% of my time with people who go to church, and 10% of my time with people who don't go to church. Since joining the golf club over the last 10 years, that has been completely reversed. I now spend 90% of my time with people who don't go to church, and about 10% of my time with lovely people like you who do go to church. Now, this has been very interesting, very challenging, and I think has been really good for both me and for Judy. And in the light of that, think about golf, I thought I would show you one of the shots that I have to try and make when I play golf with my friends week in and week out. This is a view from the 8th tee of our golf club. And the green, as you can see, I hope, right down the bottom there, is about 325 yards away. Now, although you may not be able to see it very clearly on there, on the left-hand side, by the left-hand arrow, you can see there's a row of trees. What you can't see from that picture is that just at the other side of those trees, there is a public footpath, which goes all the way down from the tee, right down, and goes past the green at the bottom. On the right-hand side, as you can see, there's some trees there. You may just be able to pick out another green that belongs to another hole. And that particular area there is all classed as out of bounds. So there I am, standing on the tee, waiting to hit my ball with my golfing friends around me. And all sorts of thoughts come into my mind. Oh dear. I mustn't hit the ball too far left. You'll end up in the trees, or even worse, it might go over the trees and hit somebody on the footpath on the other side. And, I mustn't hit the ball to the right either, because if I do that, it'll probably end up out of bounds and I'll lose 2 shots. Oh, my word, what am I going to do? Now, the terrible thing about the brain and golf is that if you think about what you don't want to do, you can bet your bottom dollar that's where the ball's going to go. What you have to try and do, which is actually easier said than done, is you have to try and think really hard about where you do want the ball to go. And where you want the ball to go is by that red arrow down there, a little area in the middle of the fairway. If you do that, you do at least have some hope that the ball may end up where you want it to go. Now, Steve has asked me today to preach on the passage that Helen's just read to us from Matthew 6, verses 25 to 34, in this series on the Sermon on the Mount. And it is a passage that I think really does reflect very well what I'm thinking about when I'm stood on the 8th tee of the golf course, because it is a passage that is about focus and priorities. It is about looking at where you want to go. It is about what your aims and objectives are, and to focus on those. Now, interestingly enough, the first half of the passage is all about the importance of not worrying. You may have noticed when Helen read it to us that 4 times in verses 25 to 31, Jesus uses the word worry. Verse 25, do not worry. Verse 27, who have you by worrying? Verse 28, why do you worry? Verse 31, so do not worry. And so we're going to look today at Matthew 6, verses 25 to 34, under the overall heading of the main thing. And I want to consider with you the importance of having the right focus as we move into the future, as we think about where we want to go, either as individuals or as a church. And the first point I want to make is to consider the things that deflect us from our focus in verses 25 to 32. Now, coming back to my concerns, as I stand on the 8th tee of our golf course, I want to make the point here that the worries that I have are real and they are legitimate. I remember one occasion when I was standing on the 8th tee and I happened to notice that a family was walking down the path to the left, and I became intensely worried. Oh, no. Oh, my word. What happens if I hit the ball and it hits one of them? I know it's never, ever happened in the past, but it might happen. And I began to really worry about it and I think about it and I couldn't get it out of my head. So what did happen? Well, I hit an absolutely dreadful shot that went nowhere. In verses 25 to 32, Jesus speaks about the things that can distract us in our lives because we worry about them. Now, I guess that if I was to go around the church today and ask you, what are you worried about? We would get all sorts of interesting answers. Some of you say, I'm really worried about the situation in Ukraine and how that's going to develop. Others of you would say, well, I'm really, really worried about my children and my grandchildren's education. And others would say, well, the thing that worries me most is my health. Or I'm worried about how am I going to keep warm when the weather gets cold and the prices seem to go up? And can I really afford the things that I need? And others of you will say, well, I'm really worried about my relationships and I don't seem to be doing very well in those. And so we could go on. All these things that worry us, and I want to suggest to you that these are legitimate. They are fair concerns to have. They are things that we need to be aware of. Now, interestingly, Jesus summarized the things that worry us into 2 headings: life and body. Verse 25, do not worry about your life or about your body. Now, when you think about these 2 words, I think they really do sum up the things that we tend to worry about. Life. We worry about what may happen to us in our lives. Will we have the strength to cope? How will we know what is the right course of action? Where is my life going? What does the future hold? What is the point of it all? Would I be able to cope if Christians in this country face the kind of persecution that Christians face throughout the world? Do I have the strength to stand up for what I really believe in? These are important life questions, and they can be the source of worry to us. And body. Will I remain healthy during this coming year? Do I have sufficient resources to feed, clothe, and house myself and my loved ones? How will I cope as I grow older and I become more frail? And again, these are important concerns that people have, and they can easily become for us a source of worry. Life and body. Looked at in another way, I think you could argue that these two words cover external worries and internal concerns. Life is about those deep and perhaps invisible worries that we have about direction and value, strength, love, and so on. And body is about those external concerns that we have, like heating and food and finance and health and so on. And both these internal and external factors are things that can so easily be allowed to distract us and worry us. And we find ourselves concerned about these things, and they stop us from keeping our right focus and can draw us away from the things that are ultimately the most important, the main thing, as our title puts it. So Jesus, having spelt out these concerns and the worries that people have, and having done so, he then uses a very interesting but a very powerful word. I like this word. It's the word but. You know how often that's used, isn't it? You had a really nice day, but. And here Jesus used, don't worry about these things, but seek first. He then goes on to tell us how to maintain our focus despite all those things that we see around us. So the second point I want to make is to focus on the main thing at the beginning of verse 33. I remember once hearing a story about a young man in a remote tribal area who was really, really worried. And he went up to the chief of his tribe and he said, look, I'm really, really worried that I'm going to get distracted. I'm worried that when I walk past the betting shop, I shall be tempted to go in and I will waste all my and my family's money. And I'm really worried that when I walk past that shop that sells pornography, that I will be tempted to go in and I will not demonstrate the real love that I have for my wife. And I'm worried too that when I walk past the houses of all the rich people, I shall be tempted to covet what they have. And I may even find myself breaking into their homes and stealing what is theirs. And I just don't know what to do. I just get so easily distracted by these things. And the chief thought for a moment and he said, this is what you're going to do. I want you to fill a bucket brim full of water. And then you are to carry the bucket full of water through the village. My men will follow you. If you spill one drop of that water, then my men will arrest you and put you in prison. So the young man went and he filled his bucket full of water and he walked through the village. And he walked straight past the betting shop. And he walked past the pornographic shop. And he went past the people in all their rich houses, and never once was he tempted to walk into them. Why? Because he was now focused on a greater thing, a much more important thing that put all the other things into their perspective. And having outlined the things that can easily worry and distract us, Jesus goes on to give a priority that is so big, glorious and so important and wonderful that focusing on that will put everything else in its proper place. But, says Jesus, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Here is a twofold priority that I think helps to overcome the twofold distraction of life and body. The first is to prioritize God's kingdom. God's kingdom embraces anything that seeks to reflect the lordship of Jesus. It is about focusing in our lives on those things that lie at the heart of everything that Jesus wants for ourselves and for other people. Now, clearly, as we've been thinking about with Easter, it includes outreach in seeking to win other people for Christ. But it also includes social action. It includes a real concern for God's creation. It involves being interested in the rights of other people, the desire for peace, and so on. It is about seeking to see the reign and the rule and the love of God becoming more and more evident in our world and in society. It is a priority that is enormously challenging. And it is one that affects every area of life. But that's not all, because Jesus also says, seek first God's righteousness. Now, this priority is about seeking to live in accord with God's moral standards in both our thoughts and our behavior. It is about always wanting and seeking to do that which is right and honorable. It is about living a life of integrity. Seeking first God's righteousness means that negatively I will avoid that which is dark and misleading, unkind, untrue, unjust, malicious, or lacking in love. And it means that positively I will seek to live out that which is pure and holy and gracious. It is about being loving and kind. It means that I will seek to live by the same standards, whether I'm at home or at work or in my place of leisure or in church. It is about people being able to say of me that what you see is what you get. Taken seriously, this priority too is immensely challenging. Now, there's a sense in which just as life and body reflected internal and external concerns, so it seems to me that God's kingdom and God's righteousness also reflect internal and external standards and ways of living. God's kingdom can be seen as primarily about my external life. It is about my behavior, about the things that I do for others or don't do. It is about the way that I live, the way that I deal with people. Does it reflect the rule of God and the love of Jesus? And God's righteousness is primarily about my internal motivation. It is about my attitude, my sense of love, my willingness to forgive. It is about my personal integrity. It is about everything that undergirds the person who I am. And so the way to maintain our focus, I would like to suggest to you, is not by condemning ourselves. It is not by thinking, oh, here I go again, I'm worrying about this, that, and the other. It's about time I put these things at the back of my mind. No, it is about focusing on those things that are ultimately matter, about God's kingdom and God's righteousness. And then the third point I want to make is to see the promise that is given to those who do focus at the end of verse 33. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and, here's the promise, all these things will be given to you as well. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that raises a few problems in my mind. And I find myself beginning to think about it. And the first problem that comes into my mind is the most obvious one. Well, it doesn't always seem to work like that, does it? It certainly didn't work like that, did it, for Jesus? No one could have been more focused or more committed on seeking God's kingdom and his righteousness than Jesus was. After all, on one occasion, Jesus said, didn't he, my meat is to do the will of my Father in heaven. However, despite that focus that Jesus had, His life ended at the age of 33 when he hung naked, thirsty, and in agony upon a cross. Since Jesus, there have been many people who have sought to focus genuinely upon these words, but they've not been clothed and they've not been fed. And instead, they face pain, hunger, deprivation, and death. Now, the fact that this promise doesn't always seem to work out in practice actually solves the second problem that these words can present to us. And that is that this promise must never be seen as a means to an end. Jesus is not saying here, seek God's kingdom in order that you may be clothed and provided for. It is not that the provision of food and clothing is somehow the reward for seeking God's kingdom. It is not therefore that the real goal of seeking God's kingdom and righteousness is that I may have what I think I need. It is not at all. These things are to be sought for their own ends, for their own sake. So what is Jesus actually saying here in this verse? And I think that there are two things that we need to recognize here. And the first is this, that when people really do genuinely seek first God's kingdom and righteousness as their number one priority, then they recognize that everything else they have is a gift. They come to see that their food, their clothing, their friendship, their homes, their family, all their material possessions, these are gifts from a generous God. Not only that, but they also recognize too that their enjoyment of good health, their personal abilities, their appreciation of music, beauty, humor, and so on, these too are precious gifts from God. They do not say, or they do not even think, well, I've served Christ. I've been a really good Christian. I'm a moral and upright person, so I deserve these things. I've earned them, and it's up to God now to grant them to me. Now, in fact, the opposite is the case. They believe that all these things have simply been given to them as an example of God's grace. They are gifts for which they are extremely grateful. The second point I think to make about this promise is that while it's not always found in the life of the individual, it most certainly would happen if everyone sought God's kingdom and his righteousness as their number one priority. The truth, of course, is that there is enough food and enough shelter and enough clothing to go round. But human greed, unrighteousness, sometimes plain cruelty, means that these things do not work out for everybody. And it seems to me that Jesus, when he made this promise, was not only speaking to us as individuals, saying, you do this, it will work out for you, but he's also, I think, talking to us as a community of people. And the point is that it's not just good for me to have the right focus, it is also good for the community of which I am a part if I have the right focus and I maintain it as well as I'm able to. And it follows too that if I lose my focus and I become distracted by other things, then the community of which I am a part would also suffer as a result of my lack of focus. These words of Jesus, therefore, encourage us to be profoundly grateful in recognizing that everything we have and everything that we are is a gift of grace from a loving Father in heaven. But it also challenges us to see how important it is for the good of society as a whole, and particularly among those people with whom we have closest contact, that we keep that supreme focus and get our priorities right. I began with a golfing illustration. I want to end with one from farming. And I heard some time ago the story of a young apprentice farmer who was learning how to plough a field. And he tried to make sure that the furrows went in an absolutely straight line. And so the farmer says to him, what you need to do is fix your eyes on something and follow it. So then he left the apprentice to work it out. And he came back and the furrows went all over the place. And he said, I thought I told you to fix your eyes on something. And he said, I did, on that cow. So said the farmer, you need to don't fix your eyes on something that moves around all the time, fix your eyes on something else. So he went off again, and the guy came back, and this time the furrows were a bit better, but they sort of veered off in a strange direction. So he said, what did you fix your eyes on this time? He said, not on a cow, no, I fixed my eyes on a cloud. And the farmer said, no, you need to fix your eyes on something that's not going to move. Try that tree. So he fixed his eyes on the tree, and the furrows came out beautifully straight. It is true, isn't it, in our lives that we can fix our eyes on the things that move around all the time, the things that worry us, the things that distract us, that cause us to fret. Jesus summarized these things as life and body. And they are important and they are legitimate things, but they are not to distract us from that which is the most important. Our first priority, the main thing, is to seek God's kingdom and his righteousness. It is an incredibly high calling, but an immensely worthwhile one. And as we do that, may we know the blessing for ourselves and for others as we live with gratitude and seek always to do that which honors God and is for the good of others.